I prefer a rice that grows fast, because the water in the inland valley rises quickly when it rains. When the water rises and the rice plants are not yet tall enough, the water will get into the rice plant and burn it. But when the plants will grow fast enough to a certain height, the water will no longer be able to flood and spoil the rice. My preferred variety produces well and ripens before the end of the rains. Even when it's ripe, you can leave it and do the other work as its grains will not shatter. And when the women prepare it, it's very nice. You do not want to invite the neighbors when you eat it. It's that good. That is how I made my choice. We have planted many varieties. Some swell during cooking, others don't. The small grains swell more than the bigger ones. Each of us has selected the variety that filled her heart. To respond to changing conditions in climate, environment and markets, researchers continue to develop new rice varieties. But to know how a new variety is appreciated outside the research station is a challenging and necessary step before any new variety can be released in a country. Participatory varietal selection, or PVS, is a method that allows different stakeholders to get involved in identifying constraints and selecting new varieties out of the hundreds developed by rice breeders. As farmers will be the first to use or reject a new variety, participatory varietal selection requires a good understanding of farmers' knowledge, realities and aspirations. When testing new varieties, farmers also consider the cultural and social needs, as well as market demands. PVS therefore requires the involvement of social scientists. We are trained to work with those who own the land, those who take decisions about the soil and about the plants, those who organize everything on their farm. If we do not involve them in the decision-making, even if we understand his soil and bring him solutions, if we don't put the farmer first, we will not succeed. During the participatory varietal selection, consider gender at all times. While men may find yield more important, women may be more interested in varieties that give vigorous seedlings and that tiller well, because this may reduce their need to weed. As a woman, I tell them, even when we're doing the diagnostic study or wherever we intervene, let's take the real role and tasks of women, men, young and older people as a starting point. Different people in different places have their own criteria to evaluate varieties. Multiple stakeholders are involved in the selection process, as a promising variety in the field may still give a poor grain after milling or fail to be appreciated by rice sellers or consumers. By meeting everyone's criteria, you guarantee that the retained varieties will be well appreciated by all people, from farmers to consumers.
L'avantage, c'est que le producteur n'adopte.
The advantage is that the producer only adapts what he sees, adapts what he knows, and the consumer also adapts what he has tasted or touched. And the PVS method allows precisely all these elements to be brought together quickly. In 1 to 2 years after a variety has been evaluated on the station, it can then be distributed.
Une année, 2 années, après qu'une variété soit créée, évaluée déjà en station, elle peut être diffusée.
Participatory varietal selection can reduce the time between the development of a variety and its adoption by farmers from 7 years to 3 years. For this, it's best to also involve the National Variety Release Committee. Why is that?
Un mécanisme doit être réglé entre le comité national et justement les structures qui veulent promouvoir.
A mechanism should be worked out between the National Release Committee and precisely those agencies that want to promote PVS, in such a way that the agency that is authorized to do PVS is one that can receive the dossiers requesting the release of new varieties. This will shorten the evaluation, which can be done directly by the agencies on behalf of the National Committee. With this system, many varieties which we have created can pass rapidly to the farmers and the consumers who depend on them to improve their situation.
Et des consommateurs qui n'attendent que ça pour vraiment améliorer leur situation.
Now that we know that partnerships form the basis of participatory varietal selection, let's take a closer look at the steps involved before, during, and after crop establishment. The steps provide some guidance, but flexibility is needed, as the people involved, the resources available, and the criteria to evaluate new varieties differ from one place to the other. We already know that participatory varietal selection takes 3 years. Considering the investments needed, we have lots to gain by proper planning. During the first year, a diagnosis helps to identify and characterize the test sites. Social scientists and extension staff conduct interviews or structured surveys to gather information about the cropping systems, existing farmer groups, farmers' constraints in rice farming, as well as the strengths and weaknesses of their rice varieties. To identify what type of new varieties are needed, make sure to discuss with all stakeholders, including traders, millers, and restaurant managers. Let us now see how to set up a PVS. The first year, many new varieties are compared in a so-called rice garden trial that is established in a farmer's field or a research site. The site should be easily accessible for farmers from neighbouring villages. The owner of the field manages the rice garden under the supervision of the rice breeder. In the rice garden trial, the national agronomic recommendations for rice cultivation are applied, including fertilizer application and weeding. Based on the needs identified by all stakeholders, up to 30 varieties from the breeder's collection are planted in the rice garden to compare their performance against farmers' varieties. Each variety is sown in 5 rows of 5 meters in length, at a spacing of 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters in lowlands and 25 centimeters by 25 centimeters in uplands. Each small plot has its own label with a number. Small paths of 40 centimeters wide allow farmers to easily walk between plots and observe the varieties during evaluation visits. Ideally, 3 visits are organized to evaluate the performance of the varieties. This can be at the tillering, flowering, and maturity stages. Each visit is organized in the same way, as we will see here. First, explain the setup and objective of the trial. Allow the owner of the field to describe to the visitors how he or she has managed the field. Once all is clear, farmers can move around freely to observe the varieties for 1 hour. Each farmer identifies which 3 varieties she would like to plant in her own field the next year, and which 3 varieties she would absolutely not want to plant. After 1 hour, take each farmer separately into the rice garden to discuss which 3 varieties they retained and which ones they rejected.
Il y a le poids de la tradition, le poids de la société qui joue.
There is the weight of tradition, the weight of the society that plays. Women cannot contradict men, and secondly, the young cannot be against the elder. When we have men and women producers come, we divide them into 2 groups, and inside there are subgroups. In one group we put people of a certain age, and in the other group we put all others who are younger. And we do this for both the women and the men. And in each group, now each person evaluates individually.
Et dans chaque groupe maintenant, les gens passent individuellement.
Ask each farmer to rank their choice from best to worst. For each variety, ask the farmer why he or she has made that choice. Carefully write down all the information. Find out what characteristics are most important to the farmer in a rice variety, and ask if these characteristics can be found in any of the varieties. Once this is done, sit down with the farmer in a shaded place to gather some personal data. After collecting all farmers' feedback and personal data, you can wrap up the exercise. The researcher analyzes the data from the feedback sheets, as well as the yield and other agronomic data, and identifies up to the 10 most preferred varieties. These are then multiplied for seed during the dry season, for further testing in the second year. Breeder seed production can be started at this time. In the second year, the retained varieties are tested in multiple locations and in 2 different ways. In each location, one plot is established where all 10 varieties are grown under recommended practices and managed by a scientist in an experimental design. These are called mother trials. Varieties are compared the same way as in year 1. At the same time, all participating farmers select 2 or 3 new varieties out of the 10 and compare these with their own varieties in their own field. Farmers manage these trials and apply their own cultural practices. These are called the baby trials. The baby trials allow farmers to test the new varieties under their own conditions, which helps in the early diffusion of the varieties. As we mentioned that also other stakeholders need to be involved, where do they come in? Well, after harvesting the mother trial, all varieties are tested for grain quality. Millers, traders, food processors, restaurant managers, and the general public attend and give their scores on characteristics that matter to them. All use the same 5-level scale. As rice is used for different types of dishes, always check the suitability of the new varieties in rural areas in function of how people want to use the rice. Now you see several varieties of small grains, medium and large, so there are several grades 5 to 6. That one, if you rub it in your hand, is easily husked, and it's also easy to cook. Cooked rice remains intact and does not stick together. It remains edible and sweet. Cooking and tasting tests are also done with restaurant managers in urban areas, as well as by a professional panel in a sensory analysis laboratory to evaluate aroma and other aspects.
C'est important d'impliquer les restauratrices parce que si la variété est mise au point, alors que pour cuisiner ces variétés,
it is important to involve restaurant managers because when the variety is developed and while cooking, it poses problems. It means that the work is not totally done. Hence the involvement of restaurant managers to appreciate not only visually the varieties, but also to appreciate how the preparation of the variety compares to the rice that they usually prepare.
Se passe par rapport au riz habituel qu'elles ont l'habitude de préparer.
Combining the different criteria, an average grain quality score is given to each variety. Now we have seen the main steps of participatory varietal selection. As rainfall and pest or disease outbreaks may vary a lot between years, repeat all trials from the second year one more time in year 3 for final validation. At this stage, other farmers can also volunteer to test the best candidate varieties in their own fields, and farmers who took part in the first 2 years of the PVS can only grow the variety they prefer most. Rather than giving out seed for free, you may ask them to buy small quantities of seed. At the same time, grow the most preferred selections in agronomic trials to develop recommendations for the new varieties. After the 3rd year, the varieties that performed best compared to the local Czech varieties and that farmers and consumers accepted are proposed for inclusion in the national variety list. To speed up the process, already in year 3, the researcher can propose some candidate varieties for release. Invite officials from the National Variety Release Committee to take part in the evaluation tests with farmers. Let's summarize it all one more time. Participatory varietal selection involves many stakeholders in identifying constraints and in selecting promising new varieties that address these constraints. The method tests new varieties for agricultural performance in farmers' fields and for grain quality. Participatory varietal selection ensures that new varieties get released faster, and most importantly, that seed and knowledge about the new varieties become quickly available in farmers' communities. If we have a good yield, we'll eat our fill. If someone has enough to eat, there is no more conflict.